Good morning and welcome. This is the Tuesday morning class at Temple Beth Israel Longboat Key. This Tuesday, if you look at a Jewish calendar, is a special day, as is tomorrow. Today is Yom HaZikaron, the memorial day for those soldiers of Israel who died in battle, for those who died in terrorist attacks, those who died for the establishment and protection of the State of Israel. Tomorrow is Israel Independence Day. When we talk about special days in the Jewish calendar, certain days automatically come to mind. Some are more powerful than others. We focus, of course, on the high holidays, and if I may just digress for a moment, right now at this time of the year we have several months before the high holidays, but those of us who need to make decisions at Temple Beth Israel are already thinking of definite possibilities of what we can and cannot do this year because of the coronavirus. We plan all kinds of scenarios, the best on one extreme, the worst on the other, to make the high holidays available to you. We have made a major production out of Hanukkah and out of Pesach. But if we were living in Israel, or if we were part of families that lost people in Israel's wars or terrorist attacks, today, Yom HaZikaron, would be a very important day. Who in Israel does not have a family member, a friend, a neighbor who perished under the most horrendous circumstances? The day affects everyone. And this is not just a commemoration of something that happened in ancient history. This is a reality that still faces people who put their lives on the line, and even if they don't make that decision, are targeted because they're people who don't want Israel to exist and don't want Jews to live there. This Memorial Day is a very solemn day. Before this recording, I watched online, we live in a virtual world, the ceremony that took place at Israel's embassy in Washington, D.C. Very moving, very powerful, with a near relative of somebody who died, in this case in one of Lebanon's wars, leading in the recitation of the Kaddish. Now, right next to Yom HaZikaron is Yom HaAtzmaut, Israel Independence Day. It is not a day of mourning, it is a day of celebration. And we are still in the process of trying to figure out, to develop the best way to commemorate, and specifically, the best way to commemorate liturgically. By that I mean having religious services celebrating this day. We celebrate things that happened in the ancient past. Hanukkah, for example, the rededication of the temple. We celebrate other things that took place in the ancient past. Purim, for example, that the Jews were not all wiped out by Haman. Now, the story of Purim tells us that the events took place in what is today Iran. But the entire Jewish world commemorate that day throughout history. The reestablishment of a Jewish country in the land of Israel took place in one place only, but needs to be commemorated, like Purim, by the entire Jewish world. How do we celebrate happy occasions? From a traditional point of view, you add the Hallel Psalms to your service, and keeping in mind, parenthetically, there are Jewish services for every day of the week. It's not just a matter of Shabbat or worse, just Friday night. There has been a debate to what extent you include Hallel. Is Hallel part of the tradition that we do on this day, or are we, as some of our more pre-modern brethren think, are we forbidden to add anything new to our calendar? A little footnote for those of you who don't care for the fact that I said brethren and its masculine form. The people I'm talking about are only brethren. They haven't given women a decision-making role in this at all. I have a Jewish calendar that was given out by Chabad. I mentioned by name because I don't want to leave it as a mystery. On that calendar, Yom HaZikaron and Yom HaTzmaut are missing. They're not days because historically they weren't days. Of course they weren't. These are modern things. But the Jewish people still exist because we have been capable of adapting and innovating. We don't innovate from scratch. We take what is traditional and add to it. So on Yom HaZikaron, the Memorial Day, it would be most appropriate to say El Malei Rachamim, fully compassionate God on high, to the souls of those among our people who bravely gave their lives for the redemption of our land. Grant clear and certain rest with you, and the lofty heights of the sacred and pure, whose brightness shines like the very glow of heaven. Source of mercy, forever enfold them in the embrace of your wings, secure their souls in eternity. Eternal One, they are yours. May they rest in peace, and let us all say Amen. The El Malei Rachamim is what we say at a Yizkor service. The El Malei Rachamim is what we say when we visit graves in the cemetery. And parenthetically again, this Yom HaZikaron is a very different one because it is not safe for people to gather together in large groups or even visit the graves of their loved ones in Israel. Reading the El Malei Rachamim, which I just did in translation, is a way of connecting with our history, with our liturgical history. There are different ways of commemorating the reestablishment of a Jewish country in the land of Israel. As I say, we are still struggling with the best way to do it. From a secular point of view, you dance and you sing folk songs. From a religious point of view, you read psalms of thanksgiving to God. Some would have more psalms, some would abbreviate. There's a whole history behind that. There is a special prayer. Some of you are familiar with the opening words of some of these prayers, and some of them we have even sung in our synagogues. The prayer for the state of Israel. Avinu Shebashamayim, our Father who is in heaven. That's where they got the idea. It's ours, by the way. Another interesting historical footnote. Avinu Shebashamayim, Tzur Yisrael B'Goalo, the Rock of Israel. And our translation in Mishkan Tfilah does not bring this out clearly. A Rock of Israel and a Redeemer. Now, what is this referring to? Every text has a text behind it, a reference to another text. In Israel's Declaration of Independence, God specifically is not mentioned unless you think of God as Tzur Yisrael, the Rock of Israel, and that is certainly a legitimate way of doing so. The extreme secularist atheists who were part of the committee that put everything together and approved the final text did not want references to God. Understandably so from their perspective, not from ours. The compromise was to refer to Tzur Yisrael, the Rock of Israel. As one of my rabbinic colleagues put it, this prayer for the state of Israel is almost like a gloss, a midrash, on Israel's Declaration of Independence. making sure that Tzur Yisrael, the rock of Israel, is Avinu Shabashamayim, obviously God. Now, moving down another line or two, the state of Israel, Barech et Medinat Yisrael, bless, protect the state of Israel, Reshit Smechat Geulatenu, the beginning of the flowering of our redemption. Is the state of Israel, theologically, religiously, the beginning of that final redemption that Jews prayed for over the ages, where all of us, put in parenthesis who want to, can live in the land of Israel as Jews and freely as Jews without being threatened, without fear, and going along with that, universal peace, justice, brotherhood. Is Israel that? Is Israel just a place for Jews to be safe? A more secular explanation. There are different editions of the prayer for the state of Israel, and instead of saying the beginning of the flowering of our redemption, another text would say, Barech et Medinat Yisrael, bless, protect the state of Israel, Shetehei Reshit Smechat Geulatenu, that it may be the beginning. It isn't, but may it be. The existence of the state of Israel, not politically, but theologically, is a huge challenge. It wasn't supposed to come about by human action or human agency. God was supposed to intervene in history and do this. Well, some of our people decided we're not going to wait for God, we're going to do it ourselves. And maybe a religious interpretation as agents of what God would want. It upset what everybody's expectations were, especially if the ruling powers, the government, is a secular government, especially since the early governments of Israel were very secular, even though they made their peace with the religious parties. The existence of the state of Israel provides also a firm challenge to those who feel that the Jews were exiled, left the land of Israel as a result of God's punishment for their misbehavior. Well, we've returned. And that is a challenge for many people. It wasn't supposed to be that way. No matter what your theological perspective, no matter how your view of how the wording of the prayer for the state of Israel should be put together, whether we see value in both approaches, we need to step back and realize this isn't just an interesting day that, who cares about, as for example, and I'm getting back to Memorial Day, as I see it, with cynicism and bitterness, Memorial Day in the United States. For if I didn't know any better, and I came to the United States for the first time over Memorial Day, I would think this is the time to go to the big box stores. You can't anymore, I know, but go to the big box stores and get a new television set. In Israel, Memorial Day is far more serious and more solemn. And the 4th of July in this country may be a time where you have to eat hot dogs and get together and have picnics. And there is that celebratory aspect to it, and certainly from a secular perspective in Israel. But it is also a readjustment of Jewish history, that there is such a thing as Jews having a country of their own. And where every one of us Jews we should know that there is a place where if God forbid we have to go, there won't be immigration restrictions. The history of modern Jewish reality has been the history of migration. How many of us have lived in the same country for generations? The upheavals of the 20th century changed all of that. But even before, we were looking for a better place to live, a safer place to live, a place where we could do better. Recent studies of Jewish migration show that although it was persecution that drove a lot of Jews to seek new homes, there was also the reality to find a better life. If the economy was declining, if jobs weren't available, and if the population was growing, what do? You pick up and you leave. And you leave Russia and go to England, let's say, or to America. Jews now have a place to go in addition to America, in addition to England. When Jews left the Soviet Union, and again within our own memory, and came to Israel, Israel took them in. When Jews needed to leave Ethiopia, Israel took them in. The amazing example of Israel should not leave our minds and our thoughts at any moment. And I say this and want to point out what others have emphasized. I need to mention, but it's not my emphasis. We try to justify Jews and we try to justify Israel by speaking about accomplishments. There's an enormous amount of scientific research in Israel today that is directed toward dealing with the coronavirus. And may the right treatment be found to deal with those people who have the virus, and the right approach to be found that we can protect ourselves from it in the future. Turn back the clock a little bit in more wider Jewish terms. Temple Beth Israel were all old enough to remember the fears of polio. And we used to say when we were proud to be Jews, look at the Salk vaccine, the Sabin vaccine, the Sabin treatments for polio. These people were Jews. And right now, those individuals who want to boycott Israel, who want to boycott Israeli products, who want to sanction Israel, who want to divest from Israel, the invention, the scientific progress of Israeli scientists may save their lives. We celebrate on the secular level of scientific progress. We celebrate on the secular level of a very developed country. We celebrate that despite all the chaos of Israel's politics today, and I'm saying this on a specific day, the final deal of the new government is supposed to be worked out in a couple of days. I wouldn't be surprised if the whole thing falls apart. But despite all the chaos, there is still an effort to have elections, to hear what the people want to say, to have the rule of law, where courts can make decisions and pass judgment on politicians. May all of us take a moment and pause and think of that trivial thing that we call the calendar and the important dates on our calendar. And yes, historically we remembered yahrzeits, and now we commemorate birthdays and wedding anniversaries. And we've got the days that maybe we have to commemorate differently this year. If you had plans for Memorial Day, the American Memorial Day weekend, they may have to change. The calendar that so many of us who've had children, who have grandchildren live by, the school calendar, doesn't exist anymore with the uncertainty that we are confronting. The Jewish calendar, or the new year that begins in the fall. And we understand what it means, and we have the picture of synagogues crowded with people. Or maybe that won't be possible anymore. I could go on, but let us not ignore the days on our calendar. One that we commemorated last week, where we remember the victims of the Shoah. The day we commemorate today, Israel's Memorial Day, Yom HaZikaron. And what we commemorate tomorrow, Yom HaAtzmaut. In the past years that I have been here, I've attended the Federation's celebrations for Yom HaAtzmaut. I recommend very highly get online. There are all kinds of wonderful things which you can see virtually, but that is the sign of the times. And keep in mind that we have kept ourselves alive, refashioned ourselves, reinvented ourselves through the ages, as we are trying to do right now by presenting this class to you virtually. I sit here and I imagine myself not sitting in my house, but in the library of Temple Beth Israel. And one of our goals, by the way, is to have a backdrop behind me that looks like the library. We're not ready to set it up yet, but we're improving the technology constantly. I also want to encourage you to take advantage of our Friday night and Saturday morning programs this Shabbat. And I tease you that this Friday night there's going to be, with our Facebook and YouTube production, a little bit of a surprise for you. So, as I say, using the language of a different generation, tune in later, come back this Shabbat, come back next week. Let us continue to visit together, if only this way. Thank you for joining us.